Kavasseur and Jimmy Price here. Take a seat next to us around the Tanoa and let's have a shell and talk Kava. Jimmy Price, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, just hanging in there. It was a pretty standard week. A lot of answering phones and
Uh,
listening to people complain. Yes, that's about standard for me. Yep.
yeah, for me, it was more just sitting in front of my computer and writing a bunch of really complicated information about camps for displaced people in South Sudan. So that was interesting, but mostly pretty depressing, actually. But
Yeah.
it's good work.
Yeah. You're making a difference. That
Yeah,
means a
yeah,
lot. I answer
absolutely.
phone. I listen to people complain about their ice machines breaking, man.
Look, people need ice, man, especially in
Oh no, believe me, I
especially in the
know.
winter.
Oh, I
Especially in the
know.
winter.
I'm well aware of how much everyone needs ice. Yeah, that's something that I go to sleep thinking about sometimes. Yep. So we should start. Yeah, that's what we'll do. Oh yeah, but a good weekend anyways. It ended fine. That's all that matters. The Friday came around and the end of the week came around and the weekend finally showed up. So it's all good.
Yeah. Well, Jimmy, we came here to and met here today to discuss the great, the legendary, the one and only Dr. Vincent Lebot,
Yes, sir.
the famous Kava expert. And I think the first name that I ever associated with Kava, when I first started learning about Kava 20 years ago or so, I remember coming across his book, The Pacific Elixir. So he's the Muhammad Ali of Kava scientists.
Yes, I would say so. His field of expertise is quite interesting, and we'll do a little introduction here for Dr.
Yeah.
Vincent LeBeau. The paper we're going to be looking at from Dr. Vincent LeBeau is called Recent Advances in the Quality Control of Kava, the Traditional Beverage of the Pacific Islands. He was born in 1958 and he has a French citizenship. He was the director of research at the University of Montpellier in France since 2004. Got his PhD in plant biology in 1988 at the same university. And Doug will talk about his fields.
Sure, yeah. He's a plant biologist and he studies quantitative genetics and population genetics. He's well known for his studies on the agrobiodiversity of root crops. He developed a methodology that integrated taxonomy, morpho-agronomic variation, molecular genetic diversity, and the chemical analysis of underground organs. That's a mouthful, huh?
Yeah.
Also breeding, genetic improvement of root and tuber crops. He's a supervisor of several graduate students at any given time, and he does coordination within scientific networks. I think that's pretty evident in his research here. He's also worked for 6 departments, if I'm not mistaken. I remember him being associated with a ecology of economics or something and having to do with the trade networks of Kava. I remember seeing that somewhere, but it's not mentioned in this little Society for Economic Botany. Yeah.
Gotcha. We'll start from 1986 to 1987, and he was a scientist at the Laboratory for Applied Tropical Botany at the France University of Montpellier. 1988 to 1991, he has a postdoc at the University of Hawaii. 1992 to 1994, head of the Tree Improvement Program in Madagascar.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is a wild one. From 1995 to 1996, he was the scientific coordinator for genetic resource management at CIRAD, Montpellier, France. 96 and 8, head of the Northern Research Center, North Province of New Caledonia. Okay, so he spent some time in New Caledonia as well. And since 1998, he's been the head of the Root Crops Improvement Program, CIRAD, in Vanuatu, scientific coordinator of INEA, International Network for Edible Aeroids, adapting clonally propagated crops to climatic and commercial changes. Interesting. Scientific coordination of TANSEO, Taro Network for Southeast Asia and Oceania. Scientific coordination of SPYN, or the South Pacific Yam Network. So he's had quite a bit of experience in the field of
Yeah.
agriculture,
You know,
genetics.
Jimmy, I had no idea that Dr. LeBeau worked with yams and taro. That's super interesting. They are root tuber crops, and it makes sense that he would have been interested in kava. But yeah, did not know that he was also a tuber.
Expert.
Tube. Yeah.
Yep, he's very well known for that as well. The kava root and the other tubers and taro and all that good stuff that he studies. He's been a member of the Society of Economic Botany since 1988, and he received the David Fairchild for Plant Exploration Award. I looked this up. This actually wasn't written in here. I had to
Uh-huh.
see what this award was, and this is an award that recognizes individuals who have explored remote areas of the world using innovative travel itineraries, conveyances, or techniques to discover new plant species or cultivars. brought into cultivations new and important plants that hold significant promise as agricultural or horticultural varieties, or played crucial roles in the ex situ cultivation of rare or endangered plant species, or help threatened and endangered habitats and natural communities. So,
Interesting.
yes, you could definitely say he's been part of every sentence, every part of that sentence there.
One has to wonder what Dr. Lebot's first encounter with Kava looked like. Looking at his history and all the places he's been, one has to wonder when he went to Vanuatu for the first time and heard about Kava and started researching it. I really want to know what that kind of John Lennon meets Paul McCartney kind of moment was
Yeah.
like. As we're about to see, he knows a lot about Kava, probably more than anybody else in the world in terms of its scientific properties and ways of investigating it and doing analyses of it and lab experiments with it. Yeah, Jimmy, let's jump right into this complex.
Dr. Lebot suggests that Kava likely arose from the northern islands of Vanuatu. Piper witchmanii was brought from Papua New Guinea and was cultivated in the northern part of Vanuatu. And we get into sort of the actual nitty gritty of how this can be essentially proven through genetic research, going back through the islands and doing accessions based on local morphotype and chemotype and all that good stuff. We'll get into that information. But in this document, he goes and makes a really good case for there being specific types of kava with specific genetic markers. The gist is you can take these sort of markers and know the qualities of your kava through assay and through chemotypical makeup. You can actually get in there and you can know. And this kind of adds a bit of extra credence to the codex and where they were trying to ratify kava as a food when mixed with water. This gives a sort of a base where they say noble kavas. You have to be able to say, how is that a noble kava? What constitutes a noble kava's definition? And this paper helps lay that foundation of what can be defined in the different classifications of wild, two-day, and noble kavas, and the lineages of these kavas, be they wild, two-day, or noble, and how they all came from a very small genetic pool. So we'll get into that as well. But this is very, very interesting, eye-opening paper as to the actual real origins of how kava distributed throughout the islands of the South Pacific in a way that can be represented in numbers, in actual figures, and you can see it in a graph, and you can see where these kavas split off from other kavas and went different directions and things like that. It's just very fascinating to see the lineage of kava and how a cloned plants, one that cannot sexually reproduce. That way, that means the genetic information can't mix. You can't take and make a new hybrid plant. Kava is propagated through node cuttings, which means you have to take and clip the kava at a certain spot where a branch would normally grow. And they would put that in some sort of soil medium where it would start growing roots. And then that becomes they call them seedlings, but I would think that'd be a more apt term would be nodelings for these little kava plants. And that's
Huh.
how kava is propagated. Kava does not produce seeds. The only plants related to kava that produce seeds are Piper witchmanii, which is wild kava. The kavas that we know of as cultivated variety methysticum are going to be the ones that do not produce seeds, which will include your two-day and your noble kavas. But your wild kavas are the ones that can produce seeds. However, and we'll see that again in the paper, Vanuatu's two-day or wild kavas don't produce seeds. Only Papua New Guinea's and the Solomon Islands produce seeds, which is very interesting. And also says that there was something going on with the plant in the northern islands of Vanuatu that would indicate that you were having something going on that would say, hey, it's being messed with. Its DNA is being messed with. So it's very interesting. He does say cold water extraction here. And that's a hot topic
Yeah,
this
yeah,
past
Jimmy,
week.
you're bringing up the controversial topic of hot versus cold water preparation. I don't know if we might get a divided listener base based on that.
You can fight it out in the comments.
Just really quick, I wanted to say a seedling, that is the correct term. A seedling is a young sporophile developed out of a plant embryo from a seed. So any kind of germinated seed that is beginning to grow and coming out of the ground and producing its first growth is a seedling. That's the word of the day from the Kava Lounge.
I propose noodling.
You're gonna die on this hill, Jimmy.
No, no, I'm not. Definitely not. Nope. I'm not making up words here. I know I'm from Nashville, but I'm gonna stray away from that this time.
Did want to say, just to connect this to Nancy Pollock's paper in the universe of Kava Lounge reels that we've read and discussed. This does tie into the sustainability of Kava paper that Dr. Pollock published, and which we discussed on our debut episode, because he talks in the first 2 pages pretty extensively about the agriculture of Kava and the fact that smallholder farmers are mostly the producers of Kava in Fiji and Vanuatu and a few other countries. Man, just how much bans on Kava and negative press about Kava, how much damage that can cause to these smallholder farmers.
Yes.
The paper is definitely couched in that same conversation about how best to market, to sell Kava, how to make sure that it's safe for people to consume, and basically also letting people know that it is indeed a safe beverage from almost every angle you look. It's a safe beverage, and the different restrictions that were placed on it were based in bad science that basically blamed Kava for what was probably, what would you say, like
A
the cause of
manufacturing
other
a m
chemicals, a
manufacturing
manufacturing
issue. Yeah,
issue. Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to get that out there and tie it back to that first article because
certainly.
Dr. Lebot is definitely here fighting the good fight for Kava
Yes,
and trying to create a discussion about how we can best monitor the quality of Kava that's on the market and know what should or shouldn't be exported from Kava growing island nations.
correct. Yes, and that makes a big difference. The quality of the material must be defined. It's easy for us to say, "Ooh, high quality," but what does that mean? Can you put a number on that sentence? This is the attempt to put a number on that so we can have a standard so we can say, this is high quality, this is not. And this must be done. It is one of those necessary things for kava to move forward as a commodity. And I know that's not necessarily everyone's goal, but if kava is to be consumed in the United States, there must be quality standards that are adhered to and agreed upon. And this is an attempt at nailing down those standards. Topic stirred up quite a bit of controversy in 2014. We might talk about that for a little,
Yeah, I
but
think that's a good idea. Yeah, I think we
yeah,
should talk about it.
2014 was a time when you would order kavas, and I truly believe this is where our words that came from this were heavy and heady. And during this time in 2014, we were getting kavas that were obscenely sedative. They would make your skin turn into alligator scales. This is if you drank every day, you just expected this. And we weren't really all the much wiser for it. We didn't realize what we were doing. We didn't know, we had no idea. We thought that if a vendor took a bag of kava and labeled it noble, we expected that bag of kava to be noble kava. And that wasn't happening at the time. A lot of people that want to put blame in every single spot on that one, so I won't even touch it. I'll just say it happened. It got fixed. It got remedied. The exporters got wise to what people were bringing them. There are more tests now available to take care of this, but there was a lot of controversy surrounding the kava, 2-day kava, which is arguably a lower quality.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess we should define 2-day, and it's spelled TUDEI, and that's what it's been labeled that because it has a high proportion of the kava lactone known as dihydromethysticin and dihydrocavane. These are both sedative and possibly nauseating components of kava. And it has a very large proportion of that and a low proportion of kavane, which is the one that you would normally see in our drinking kavas. And what it does is it has a very long effect and nauseating effect. So you might be feeling it for 2 days. And that's truly where the name comes from. And that's why we talk about it. It's something we don't have our hands on in the standard American kava industry because while that sounds like, oh man, I'm going to get messed up for 2 days, there's more that comes along with that. It's not a good feeling and it lasts for a long time. Your skin feels like it's on fire. I believe it suffers from the Streisand effect because of some of the controversy that surrounded it for a little bit back in the 2014 time period, because we still get people that are like, ooh, funeral kava, I want to try that. It's, man, we're not trying to keep a secret from you. If you tie into one of these kavas that is a 2-day kava that is a cultivar that you can't get, but if you went there to Vanuatu and got it and tried it, you would truly understand what we talk about. These are not drinking kavas. These are not cultivars that you would like even find recreational.
To me, a 2-day kava is just like an undesirable
Mm,
lower quality kava. And there was a forbidden fruit kind of aspect to it back in 2014 and 15 when people started like blacklisting it. But I think if you go back a little bit further, if you go back further into the early onset of kava on the American kind of market, and we'll definitely jump back into the paper here. I don't want to take too much time with this, but it's in 2011 or 2010 when I first started ordering kava, or 2009 actually, when I first started ordering kava online. I actually didn't really know anything about this stuff. And I'm sure most people in the United States who drank kava at that time knew nothing about 2-day. I remember hearing the word medicinal, that medicinal kava was this really special thing that was highly coveted. But I just bought whatever kava I could find. And I was always interested in trying kava, particularly from different countries, because I didn't really know about cultivars or Waka or Loena or anything. And this 2014 2-day versus Noble controversy, my experience kind of growing up in the kava community in the United States, as it came out of nowhere, to be honest, like the whole 2-day versus Noble controversy really exploded. And it's actually a miracle that we have a podcast together because we were on different sides of this issue at one point. It's great. It shows great maturity within the community that a lot of people that used to butt heads are now very good friends and on the same page, fighting for the same thing. I think it's been mostly resolved, and 2-day kava is no longer really an issue. It's nothing that you
No.
really have to worry about anymore.
Yeah, especially with the vendors you see online, they are aware of those issues as well. It's a very simple test to see if you have kava that may not be noble. And if they tell you it's noble, if you mix it with acetone, what it does is it's an easy assay for flavocavane content. Flavocavanes are the orange and red pigments in kava. And the cultivars that have the highest amount of these chemicals are the ones that you wouldn't want to tear into if you were making an extract. The color of the resulting acetone will be yellow for noble and orangered if possible not. If you are making it traditionally, there have not been any reported injuries. It's safe to drink as a kava. It's not going to hurt you. But yeah, it took on a life of its own, and you're right about the maturity thing. It's been a long road, but this is what I had envisioned at the beginning and just talking about these sort of issues together. There was so many sides people would take, and it was just like, guys, we're all on the same team. I don't even want to fight. So all this stuff came together in one big crescendo. And we've learned through the rough road to do and what not to do and how to conduct ourselves and how to handle large groups of people. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what we do, and it's taken a while to hone that craft, and now we don't get in fights over things. If we disagree on something, we can disagree on something and still be excellent friends, and it's never a problem. Like, a disagreement is not the end of the world, and it does not change anything about the way that I feel towards a person. That's something I had to come to an understanding within myself. I've had to come to that understanding, like, we can always have those little things and still move forward, and, like, even go back and look back, and both of us can be like, "Hey," or I can go like, "Hey, dude, I messed up. I'm sorry." You can be like, "Hey, I messed up too. I'm sorry." And we both learn from it. It's not something we wanna double down on our mistakes. It's about the people who want to know more about Kava and for us to continue bringing that sort of availability of that information to those people. And I don't think you can get any better than that. I think
Okay,
what
Jimmy, I
spread
accept your apology. I accept your apology.
Yeah, there was a whole lot of stuff, man. It's not easy learning the hard way and
Yeah.
just jumping into it. But we did. We just jumped into this. Let's just walk into the unknown. And it's just, we've learned and we know how to handle ourselves and other people. And it's come a long way. It has. And topic alone shows that it's come a long way. This can cause some contention between people. And there are still people out there today that would love to sell 2-day kava hand over fist. And they are mad because they can't. And that's just the reality of it. We have to, like I said in the beginning, we have to lay down the foundation of what quality means as for kava. It has to have that definition to continue to be a viable commodity in the market. And for us not to have that, it allows anyone to define the word. And then that's, if you go into any Facebook group online that's dedicated to kava, except ours, and ask who's got the best quality kava and see how many people raise their hands. You'll get instant messages from 15 people saying, I have the best quality kava, best quality. If you say, what does that mean? How do you know that? Guarantee you almost no one can answer that question.
Yeah. That's
And
very
if you
true.
don't have some way of quantifying our kava, then we lose the ability to control the qualities that are making it to these other countries that are being consumed.
So from like a 30,000 foot perspective, when you look at this paper and you look at Nancy Pollock's paper, what all of this was in response to was adverse event reports. I don't know if that's what they call it in Germany, but there was a company in Germany that was processing kava into a extract or a kind of nutraceutical
Actually, no, it
and
was a pharmaceutical.
pharmaceutical, but was still a prescription pharmaceutical
They
or
it
a
was over the
over the
counter, but
counter.
it was as
Okay.
pharmaceutical as your over the counter Tylenol and
Okay.
cold medicine, things like that, yes.
So it was sold at drugstores
Mhm.
as a kind of calming sedative type of
Yes.
medicine. So people were buying this product, and a few of the people, I think it was like a dozen cases of people had some issues with it and liver failure. So from a 30,000 foot perspective, it's important to have this background because these isolated incidents, upon further investigation, even within the first year of this happening, and what year was this, Jimmy? This was
1998.
But the German regulatory board reversed this in 2014.
to me, that says two things. One is that we don't know whether in kava is toxic enough to cause that kind of a reaction in one of the consumers. And number two is kava scientists and kava growing countries and farmers had to do everything in their power to help the world understand that kava is actually a very safe product to drink and consume in extract form or powdered instant form or whatever it might be. The response against kava became focused on 2 day because people thought that it was really only 2 day that was causing this issue. And then as a result, the kava community, the kava market decided to really segregate noble kava and 2 day kava, which was already traditionally a segregated way of looking at it because noble kavas are more desirable in Pacific Island countries. People don't want to be drinking 2 day or Isa, as it's called in Hawaii, unless they're looking for a very specific type of kava for a type of ritual or medicinal practice. But that's really the 30,000 foot perspective.
They said kava has not been banned in the US. The things about it is it was never banned. It was looked at and an advisory
Right.
was given by the FDA, and it was an advisory. They sent out a request for medical experts to send in any sort of adverse event reports involving kava. And this caused a flurry of all those sort of little things that they definitely had nothing to do with kava. But because they requested these reports, now you're getting everything to do with kava. And we had no issues. We haven't had an issue, a hepatic issue. And this is why we talk about this being a manufacturing problem, is we have not had a hepatic adverse event report be reported to the FDA in the last 20 years per the FAERS or Federal Adverse Event Report Systems. There has not been one liver issue with Kava in 20 years. So what it tells us is that there definitely was an issue that they identified and steps were taken to solve the problem. Obviously has taken care of it. We don't see any more liver issues. We don't see any clustered events. People still consume kava and they still consume kava extracts. They're still in the market. I see it regularly. There's are kava extracts on Reddit. People routinely will consume the extract form in pills. The whole liver issue, it just remains in the past. And it says here that the only serious effects due to prolonged use that they'd ever seen were a condition known as Connie and weight loss. And the Connie that refers to the skin ichthyosis sort of condition that looks like you have scales and little lines running all over your body. And those two things, the low weight and the skin, were the only two real issues that were seen until 98.
Jimmy, have you had the crocodile skin?
Oh, yes.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I've suffered from the crocodile skin. I had to soak my feet and legs in Epsom salt and then scrape them to get all the dead skin off because it was
Wow.
yeah, it was horrible. Yeah, I was repulsed by it myself, and I was the one doing it, so it was just like, "Oh."
What kava were you drinking at the
Noble
time?
Barogu? I'm kidding, it wasn't
Oh.
Noble Barogu.
Oh, okay.
I was definitely drinking micronized 2-day Isa from
Oh,
Hawaii, and,
okay.
yeah, I do have my history with it, so I can qualify myself for the 2-day runnings. I drank it for about 8 months every day, about 3 tablespoons of this Isa every day. It got to the point where my skin burned on a regular basis, but I kept drinking it, and then my skin split, and my legs started turning into, like, alligators, and I started leaving little blood stains on my sheets from where my skin would split and bleed in the night. It changed a lot of my habits,
Yeah.
and I did not realize what I was doing. I thought that more for the money. I thought I was getting a better money's worth out of this stuff because it was like, oh, I can only use 2 or 3 tablespoons and it does all this. I can go right to sleep. No, I paid for that. You get what you pay for on that one. It's cheaper. Yeah, but your skin suffers and a lot of other things suffered too. Like I was Frosty the Skin Man. Everything just flaked off. I mean, my
That is
wife,
disgusting.
it was terrible. Like my friends would be like, "You need to go to the doctor."
It's so weird to me because I've been drinking kava for the better of 20 years. And the only dry skin symptom I've ever had is around my eyes. I've never had dry skin anywhere else on my body. I'm just one of those lucky ones that has, I guess, a different, genetic
Yeah.
genes, so different response to kava. I've never had kani. I have had the weight loss, but that's just because I drink a lot of kava. And once I start drinking kava, I pretty much just snack. I don't eat a big meal
Mm.
after I've started to drink kava for the day. So but I do have a Kavasseur video that listeners can check out where I talk about some of the other side effects that I've experienced from kava. Like, for example, if I drink it every day for weeks and weeks, which happens all the time, I can sometimes feel like I'm feeling a little bit lethargic. Maybe I should take a break, but I only need a couple days and I'm got my spring back in my step. So one thing that Dr. Lebot zeroes in on after this discussion about the unsubstantiated claims about flavocavin B. So he talks about flavocavin A and flavocavin B, and he talks about research that was done on flavocavin B that looked at it as a cause for hepatotoxicity. But he also clarifies that those studies were not conclusive
Nope.
in the sense that if you consume flavocavin B at the level that it is present in even 2-day kava, like that you're going to have liver failure.
Yeah.
There was no conclusive evidence that actually drew a line between kava and liver failure.
Yes.
Dr. Lebot is very clear that there is no evidence that any of these actions were valid, even if they were responding to 2-day kava. That being said, we're not supporting 2-day or the consumption of 2-day. But if you are to drink ISA and have a few shells of ISA here and there, it's not going to be bad for your liver. And
No.
in response to these concerns about flavocavin B and 2-day kava that were made in the scientific literature, the government of Vanuatu passed the Kava Act in 2002. Yep, the Vanuatu legislation 2002. And that Kava Act established that only noble cultivars should be exported to international markets. So that was the response that Vanuatu had because they wanted to make sure that people were comfortable importing kava, and it was a reasonable, I think, rational response for Vanuatu to do that. And Dr. Lebot played a big part in helping Vanuatu come up with that legislation.
Yes, he did. Yes, he certainly did. And that gets us back around to defining what makes a kava noble, what makes a kava wild. And this kind of rolls us into the methods section, which is quite interesting in itself, and how Dr. Lebot takes the general descriptors for a plant and breaks them down into like very specific ways of describing kava based on its morphotype or its visual appearance. And he says that it gives it different things as ACILEPSN, and those will designate general appearance, stem coloring, internode configuration, leaf coloring, lamina edges, leaf pubescence, internode shape, and node color. And he used these to classify all these different kavas down into their groups that were similar, and then tested them with different types of assay technology to get their sort of genetic profiles to find what their similarities and their differences were. He uses several different scientific methods here. They use isozyme fingerprinting, cytological counts, DNA fingerprinting, HPLC, which is high pressure liquid chromatography, NIRS, which is near infrared spectroscopy. One that also could drum up some controversy on the near infrared spectroscopy systems that are used. And what it would do is it would be able to tell you if your kava was noble or non-noble based on the reflectance spectra of what came off the kava. And even though it was a very viable tool, it never took off.
One thing to explain why Lebot talks about all these different methodologies is because he's looking for a simple test that can be developed and given to kava exporters, kava exporting countries, so that they can test the kava prior to exporting it. And then on our side, like the US markets, the European markets, Australian markets, Japanese markets, Korean markets, whatever. There's a way that people can do simple tests to make sure that they know what kind of kava they're getting. And so he's going through these different ways of looking at kava and testing it to be able to find one that is like low cost, effective, and easy to scale. And it doesn't involve crazy intense laboratory equipment that you would need to have millions of dollars to invest in. That's the purpose of why he did all these different tests with these different methodologies.
Absolutely. And he begins this with kava cultivars in wild forms. Many cultivars exist under different vernacular names in Vanuatu, and there's actually 247 that he counted at that time, morphologically described in controlled conditions. However, they only represent 82 distinct morphotypes. So that's only 82 different visually looking types of kava in Vanuatu, but 247 different names for those 82 kavas.
That's
Yep.
super interesting. So that means that when farmers were selecting for different types of kava, they identified varieties of kava that were not morphologically identifiable, meaning that you can have a farmer who is cultivating kava and he or she is planting a specific type of kava because of the effects or the taste or whatever it is about the kava that they like, but they might not necessarily know by looking at the plant which variety it is. So that is like a super impressive level of agricultural knowledge that these farmers in Vanuatu have that really you don't really find that with any other crop where there's no morphological way of identifying what type of plant you are reproducing and planting. That's just super impressive that there's 82 distinct looking plants, but 247 different plants, and the majority of them, like, you can only identify basically by asking the farmer. It's really cool. One of the biggest, coolest facts in this article. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it goes on to talk about multivariate analysis. Multivariate analysis is a technique that uses more than one variable at a time to analyze and interpret data. In this case, hierarchical clustering was used to analyze the isozymes data matrix, which was made up of 52 different electromorphs. And
Are you sure an electromorph isn't like a villain in a comic book?
yes, that's electromorph prime, and you do not want to tie into that. This is the analysis revealed that the genetic distances between the 10 identified zymotypes were very small, meaning that multiple different morphotypes had the same zymotype fingerprint, which was determined by 8 enzyme systems. This is an indication that the cultivars are likely clones of the same genotype. The results also showed that the two binomials, variety Wichmanii and variety Methisticum, both belong to the same plant Pipermethysticum species. So they're subvarieties, and it's very interesting. This paragraph that what I read was the kind of recap of it, and talks more about the specific zymotypes and different chemotypes here in the next one. And this is where we actually it would be good for a lot of people to follow the link that will be in the description to see the paper itself, because this portion involves a graph with a total of 319 accessions. So he took a total of 319 samples from different islands, 52 different islands, and they came up with 117 morphotypes. So it's 117 different distinct looking kava plants with only 9 chemotypes and only 10 zymotypes. So it really narrows everything down to what it is genetically. And we'll talk about what a chemotype is. A chemotype is the ratio expressed in a 6-digit number of these 6 kavalactones that are known for their physiological effect. Number 1 is desmethoxyyangonin. Number 2 is dihydrocavane. Number 3 is yangonin. Number 4 is cavane. Number 5 is dihydromethysticin. And number 6 is methysticin. And what you'll see a kava described as like a 426531. And those 6 digits represent the ratio in descending order of kavalactone content and percentage. So if you had a 462, cavane would be the highest ratio, kavalactone, and then methysticin would be your second highest, and then dihydrocavane would be your third. That is what constitutes what we talk about when we say chemotypes of kavas. Here he took the chemotypes of all these different kavas and boiled them down into different groups where they were similar, where they had very unique markers for their types or what they were. And he comes up different classifications for them. Here's where they start getting into the definition where he says what constitutes a noble kava and wild kavas and 2-day kavas. Here they say which Witchmanii is very rich in DHM and DHK with very low kavane content. It shows these different chemotypes, and that's represented as chemotype C on these wild kavas. And you can see where in the table where C comes up in these kavas when it's actually only in Papua New Guinea. But it's very interesting to see where these kavas originate on this graph. So that's where I highly suggest following the link and seeing this paper because it's a good one. A DNA fingerprint is a technique that can be used to determine the genetic composition. In this case, DNA fingerprinting was used to compare the genetic basis of all the varieties of plant species and to verify whether two of the varieties were actually the same species. So I used two different techniques. One's called SSR and the other's DART. And they use these to assess the genetic mapping. They use this to look at the group of 103 plants of the same species. And this result, let's see here, the results of this showed that only 11 distinct genotypes were present, and that the noble cultivars, which were morphologically different, clustered together when analyzed the molecular data. This indicates that all noble cultivars were formed through clonal selection. As a result, they are genetically vulnerable, meaning their natural ability to adapt changes is limited. And I think that was a very interesting part of this paper as well, is that the genetic information, how at risk that our noble kavas are, because they are more genetically susceptible to diseases and all that good stuff.
Jimmy, maybe for our listeners, when you talk about chemotype and you talk about those numbers, the chemotype number of a specific type of kava, do you know offhand the chemotype for Borogu? It would be helpful for the listeners to understand when you're looking for a certain type of kava that feels a certain way. People who are really into this stuff, who really nerd out on this stuff, and Jimmy and I are certainly two of those people. They look at the chemotypes. You can look at, there are resources where you can look at the chemotype for a type of kava that you're buying. Oftentimes on the website of the vendor, they will have the testing certificate with the chemotype. This is all because of Dr. Lebot, by the way. Bula to Dr. Lebot, because without him, none of this information would really be available to us, this way of talking about kava. But it's interesting to look at Ogu and Kalai and Birkar and some of these other really popular cultivars and look at the chemotypes. And oftentimes, what you're going to find is that you like kavas that are high in one thing over another. Some people like kavas that are high in yangonin. Some people like kavas that are high in kavane.
I can pitch in a little bit on the
Yeah.
chemotype of Buroguru. I know that one.
Yeah.
It's a 423. And that's generally what you're going to see out of a lot of Vanuatu kavas is that chemotype. 243, 423, very common. The last three digits will be somewhere like 156, 165. 5 generally
Yeah.
being towards the end, with 4 generally being towards the top, with Yang generally being third. And that kind of constitutes most of the results that I've seen out of Vanuatu kavas.
Yeah, usually, I feel like usually you're gonna wanna see, like, a 4. You're definitely gonna wanna see a 4 and a 3 and within the first 3 numbers.
The truth is, we don't really even know that much about Yanganin and what it might do physiologically and what part it plays in the actual effects of kava. In the rat tests, yes, they are rat tests. So we dosed rats with huge doses of these things and we're like, look what it did. But
Lucky rats.
maybe depends on what they said about it. But
That's true.
what they said about Yanganin was that the rats' dopamine levels would drop extremely, like below the testable level. Didn't detect any dopamine.
Oh, rats.
Rats, yeah, rats. And they're like, ah, dang, my dopamine. But yeah, it could be a dopamine reducing chemical, or it could have a whole bunch of different modulatory effects. But that generally is going to be the number 3 that's found on most Vanuatu kavas. Most cultivated kavas will have a high Yang content with a very high kavane content with lower proportionally hydromethysticin contents. So and that's where you come into this paper. He talks about K to DHM ratios, and that's where you take your percentage of kavane divided by your percentage of DHM, and it gives you a number. These numbers give you a specific ratio. And numbers that are higher than 3 will generally be ones that are loaded with kavane, and they're up in your face, they punch hard, and they probably will be gone by the next day. And numbers
The
lower-
kavane. You're
kavane.
talking about, yeah.
Yeah, that will be up front. If you have a high K to DHM ratio kava, You will have a faster effect kava, one that seems to be more, I guess you could say slappy. But when you start seeing kavas that have these numbers that are lower, say like below 2.5, below 2, and when you get below 1 on this ratio, you actually come into a really good indicator of whether your kava is a noble kava or a non-noble kava. When you start to approach that, when they're almost the same ratio, like you have 1.25% kava and a 1.25% DHM, that starts to move into that territory of being extremely sedative, long lasting, something that was not really coveted or not looked at, especially by the people that drank kava for all those times.
A lot of people are what I find is that most people who are just getting into kava and trying to find a kava that they really like are basically looking for something that's high in cavein.
Yep.
That's really the major takeaway when you look at the chemotypes. When
Yes,
you have a 4 at the front of the chemotype, it's probably going to be something that you are going to
absolutely.
if you're especially if you're a newcomer to kava, because that cavein has that immediate slappy effect, as Jimmy, as you nicely described, that sudden relaxing effect that is
Yes.
enjoyed around the world.
And I think we do need to get away from these terms of heavy and heady when it comes to kava descriptions, because it gives an unrealistic expectation of what's coming with an experience for a newcomer. They expect that a heady kava will cause them to get up and go clean the house. And that's not what we're talking about here. Heady kavas could possibly put you even deeper into your couch, depending on what you have going around you. It is a very subjective experience.
Another part of the paper that I thought was really interesting, and it ties into the studies that he did here, is about how different chemicals were used to improve the quality of the extracts. And by improve the quality of the extracts, he means they were used to make a stronger from the extract. That was one of the issues that happened in Germany when they were making these products. And also, there was evidence that these European companies that imported these cultivars, most of them were 2-day, they were also using stems and byproducts of the plant, like peelings, and these materials are dangerous to consume. You don't the stem peelings and the leaves are like and you should never even think about consuming those parts of the plant.
True.
Like in Vanuatu, in Fiji, in Hawaii, in Tonga, Samoa, people do not consume that part of the plant. It is known to have toxic substances in it. And that's true of potatoes. That's true of yams and cassava. You don't like there are parts of the plant that you're not supposed to consume because they're poisonous. So
I'm going to blow your mind a little bit here.
okay.
You could eat a kava leaf salad every day and it wouldn't harm your liver. They have tested pipermethysteen, and there was a lot of research done on whether pipermethysteen could be the culprit, because they thought maybe they were extracting leaves and stems and all that stuff. We're getting everything out of it. We're extracting these alkaloids as well, which pipermethysteen is. And they dosed up rats with pipermethysteen at levels that you would have to really work at to get to, like 10 milligrams per kilogram, which pipermethysteen only occurs in like very trace amounts. What they found was that they actually had a hepatoprotective effect.
Oh,
These rats, their liver scores actually were better after the treatment. There's still, for real, when they say there's no link from kava to any injury, they mean it. Like even in the
yeah.
leaves and the stems and the peels, it's just maybe. We can't even say that I personally wouldn't consume them because it's the low grade stuff. It's going to make your skin hurt. But there really is no actual toxicity link, even in the aerial portions of the plant, to actual injury from kava consumption. So it's still a big question mark with an exclamation point next to it and a
Yeah, I mean that
WTF.
yeah, I think that's one of the pieces of advocacy that I've tried to and on my YouTube videos and on my website that I've tried to really emphasize is that kava is so safe. It is like the safest possible relaxing natural substance that you could consume. And when you look at the alternatives, one of the alternatives just being stress, just not having a way to deal with stress, or you look at alcohol, or you look at other substances. Kava is so mild. It's helping you. It's good for you. It's a nourishing plant. And people can look at that different ways. Not everybody thinks that kava should be talked about as a medicine, as a supplement. But for me personally, it's a plant that has helped me in my life.
Yes.
And I know a lot of other people that it has helped immensely. Like that being said, I could always stop kava and live perfectly happy. I'd have to find some other way to relieve stress. and I'd be bummed that I didn't have Kava. But the main takeaway, and Dr. Lebot, I think, would agree with this, is that there is no evidence that Kava is bad for you and leads to any kind of serious illness. And the side effects are there, but they're so minor, and you can usually solve it by switching up your Kava or taking a break.
Yeah, and breaks are for quitters, but I'll allow it. I'll allow it.
I think we
But
should talk a little bit about the guidelines at the end here, and I'll let you take that away, Jimmy. You can run with that ball.
Lebot talks about practical guidelines to follow to secure the future of the kava industry. Number one, only noble cultivars should be used. Those having chemical compositions adequate for daily drinking and have a history of safe traditional use. This implies to make regulatory kava standardization for the best noble cultivars mandatory and to ban all but noble cultivars. This will require inter alia funding to destroy bad cultivars and replace them with noble ones. Well, I did not read
Yeah,
that
yeah,
all
I
the way
thought
the
this was
first
a
time.
bit I thought that one was a bit, like, heavy-handed. I'm not gonna try to question wisdom of Dr. LeBeau, but when I first read that, I was like, "Ban all the noble cultivars, destroy bad cultivars." That was a little bit risky, but hey,
But
like,
I don't
again, like,
understand is, do we call the question and do we question this person's understanding of it? I'll actually have to ask about that because I've never heard him say that in any other place. I've just heard him saying, "Don't export them." I've not seen the whole dig them up version of
yeah,
that.
set fire to the fields.
Right. Yeah, this would require inter alia funding to destroy bad cultivars and replace them with noble ones. I have to say why without an answer to why those non-noble cultivars are there, without a good solid reason for that, I don't think we have enough to say to destroy them because they may have a cultural reason or a ceremonial place that's very important that is only used in one specific circumstance that we don't understand. But then again, I don't live there. He does. So I'll have to
Yeah.
ask about that portion. Number two, it says only underground roots and the peeled stump, often referred to as rhizome, and basal stems, as opposed to leaves, stems, and basal stems, should be used, called waka, loena, casa in Fiji. This necessitates a legislation ensuring that only these are traded locally or for export. Wow, he wants to do it locally as well. Legislation exists in Vanuatu, but similar acts should be passed in other Pacific Island countries. It's also necessary to ensure that the requirements for use in the Pacific and in the international markets are the same. These legislations will need to be enforced effectively, and this requires significant resources on monitoring and analysis. Yeah, he's very much wants to define the peeled stump and underground
Yeah.
roots. So nothing above ground except I think it's to the first node of the stump. And that's after that, it's considered you're actually getting into the aerial portions of the plant. But number three, I think this is a very important point as well here. Number three is appellation of origins should be developed to strengthen the traceability of the raw material. And there's a need to implement a strict enforcement policy, pan Pacific, on a quality control system. And that is appellation of origin is one of those things where I think that would take care of so many issues. You wouldn't find somebody say, "I'll have Borogu," and they're in Hawaii. It's no, it's with the appellation of origins, you couldn't call it Borogu in Hawaii. It would just be, I don't know, it would be something else. You'd have to call it something else. You couldn't call it that. But it would really solidify Vanuatu's kava if we had to refer to it as Vanuatu kava.
Yeah, also what stood out to me and what this made me think of is the traceability when you use an appellation of origins. The whole point is that you can trace the product down the value chain to the local level, and you can identify where a problem started. If in agriculture, when you talk about coffee or maize or other agricultural products that are on the market, they like to be able to trace them back to individual farms where they were produced, so that if there's any kind of contamination or disease or that's contamination that's present in the product, you can trace it back to the specific farm and the town and the area where it was grown. And also, it's an indicator of the quality too. And when you think of good coffees, you think of specific places like Guatemala, Jamaican Blue Mountains. When you think of certain types of wine, it's a little bit different, but you think of different regions of France and California where they grow specific
Right.
types of grapes. So it's the same idea. You're being able to trace that specific kava product back to where it came from and ensure quality and also be able to address any problems should they come up.
And since we only have a few minutes left, we're going to go through these a little quicker. Number 4 says water soluble kava extract should be preferred over those of extracted with chemical solvents.
100%.
Yep. And I believe that too. Number 5 is for new non ethnic markets lacking the cultural background necessary for the safe use of kava. There's a need to define and establish standards for a recommended daily dosage of kava. And that may be something we need to look into, but my daily dosage is 40 grams, whatever that comes out to. But number 6, research into kava's safety issues, such as using poorly stored and manufactured kava raw material or incorrect variety and plant material, should continue to strengthen the scientific basis of the industry. And absolutely, because poorly stored and manufactured kava raw material is where I would put my money on the actual liver issues being like mycotoxins, mold, not stored correctly, wet, things like that. So, yeah, that and then that brings us to the conclusion of this paper, which talks about it says over the last 3 decades, research studies have shown that the genetic base of noble cultivars of kava suitable for daily consumption is extremely narrow. These cultivars, as demonstrated by isozymes and DNA markers, are somatic mutants of a single genotype. This genotype is controlling the chemotype, and noble cultivars are characterized by their chemotype, which is rich in kavane.
Yep.
Unfortunately, it is not possible to recognize the cultivar once the roots and stumps have been dried. Sophisticated techniques such as DNA and HPLC fingerprinting are powerful and accurate, but difficult to use in Pacific Island countries. HPTLC, which is high throughput, appears to be a cost efficient technique suitable for routine analysis for kava samples.
So for traders and exporters, a simple calorimetric test can be used to differentiate noble cultivars from 2 days and variety Wichmani raw materials. And I think he closes it really nicely with these last couple of sentences. The EU ban on kava was not supported scientifically, but
Preach.
has unfortunately damaged the reputation of kava.
Yes.
It will be extremely difficult and costly for Pacific Island countries to repair the damage that was done by this ban. However, this can be achieved through the enforcement of appropriate quality standards. So, really, Dr. Lebot, tying this all back to the purpose of this podcast and what has been across the articles we've read so far, is that this is an important to Indigenous people from the Pacific Islands and now to people all over the world. And Dr. Lebot, through this research, looking at the chemotypes of kava, looking at the history of the kava ban, has really done a lot of great work to help us look at the quality with the cheapest possible methods and be able to propose solutions for the international kava market so that kava doesn't have to face anything like what it faced in the late 1990s in Germany.
Agreed. Yes. And he's done a great job, and his work continues to this very day on this same subject. So we all have a shell to raise to Dr. LeBeau for this important work and moving the kava industry forward in a way that can be put down on paper as equality equals this. Bula to Dr. LeBeau, Malok to Dr. LeBeau, and thanks for listening tonight, and we appreciate you tuning in, listen to us talk on about some very esoteric kava information.
Yep, and we hope you enjoyed it. And again, Bula to Vincent, the one of the biggest names in kava.
Amen. And thanks for listening.